Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Nick Morana. Thanks especially to Father Michael, who allowed me to come in today. I'm in a college program where the final project is to have both a project and a final thesis paper. I'm told by my dean that I can't name the college without having special permission, so we'll just say that it's somewhere east of the Mississippi. At any rate, this is the project that I came up with. In fact, it's something that's been part of what I've been doing. I'm a member of St. Anne's Parish in Shrewsbury, and then I took part in this program where Father Michael has taught a number of classes, and I've done some of the similar things that I'm performing here in the classes that I did for Father Michael that I think went over well, and I hope it goes over equally well. The hypothesis here is that sacred art in general captivates, and it draws the observer in and sets its own course, its own journey of faith formation, to a faith journey of the individual doing the observing. And in this case, I've chosen a Baroque painter from Italy in the 1600s by the name of Caravaggio, if you're familiar with him. So I certainly want to thank St. Peter's Parish here. As a Shrewsbury resident, I'm happy that the Shrewsbury Cable allowed me to use the video camera and so forth to show this. And the purpose in the hypothesis is to get the feedback, if you're willing, and no pressure to do so, and it's that feedback and the comments and the reactions that I'll use to write the paper for the final project, and to see how, however, the art may captivate you all. Okay? Good. So, without further ado, the sacred art of Caravaggio. Caravaggio was born in northern Italy in the year 1571. His actual name was Michelangelo Meresi, and that's not to be confused with the Michelangelo, who was born about 100 years earlier. That was Michelangelo Buonarroti. He was born in 1475 and died in 1564. And if I do the math right, it's about within 10 years of the birth of our Michelangelo Meresi, and I believe he's known as Caravaggio to distinguish him from the other Michelangelo. And Caravaggio is because he was born in the town of Caravaggio. His real name, Michelangelo Meresi da Caravaggio, from Caravaggio. But everybody in the art world knows him as Caravaggio. So we start with two paintings. This is the first of two paintings, and this one is called The Conversion of St. Paul. In the Acts of the Apostles, we read about how Saul of Tarsus was an enemy of Christianity because he was out to search and destroy all these Christian communities throughout the Mediterranean. And in the Acts of the Apostle, Saul of Tarsus is blinded by a light, and he hears a voice saying to him as he was on the way to Damascus, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And Saul asks, "Well, who are you?" And Jesus reveals himself to Saul. His name is changed to Paul, or St. Paul. And this is one of two paintings. We'll go into more detail about that. And both paintings are situated in a particular basilica in Rome called Santa Maria del Popolo in Piazza del Popolo. Piazza means square, the square of the people, it's called, People's Square. And the other painting is called The Crucifixion of St. Peter. And alternatively, some of the art historians call this the martyrdom of St. Peter. These paintings are situated in a chapel in the basilica called the Cerasi or Cerasi Chapel in the basilica. And this painting is situated on the left wall of the chapel, and the St. Paul painting is situated on the right wall of the chapel. A kind of the only way you can take a picture of the chapel itself is by showing the paintings in this way. The chapel altar you can see at the bottom of the picture, and as I said, St. Paul is to the right, St. Peter is to the left. As I say, they actually face each other perpendicularly, though this picture, because of the way it was taken, looks as though they're not necessarily facing each other, but they are in fact facing each other. The other painting that you'll see is more of a traditional Baroque painting of the time, painted by a painter known as Caravaggio, and it's Gabriella, you made it. Alietta. Hi, Gisela. Plenty to eat, by the way. Have a seat. We've got some extra chairs in the back. Good, good. And this is the painting by Caravaggio showing the Virgin Mary during the Assumption. But the other paintings, as you know, are St. Peter and St. Paul. So Annibale Carracci painted that painting over the altar of the chapel, and at the same time that Caravaggio was painting his paintings, 1600 and 1601. But it's a much more typical version of Baroque art, and I'll tell you why I say typical in a few moments. Well, the first thing I'd like to go over is whether we should be even making paintings or artwork in general about holy images. In the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 8, one of the 10 Commandments is that you shall not make for yourself an idol or a likeness of anything in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters beneath the earth. So despite that admonition, that restriction about making holy images in violation of the 10 Commandments, there's actually a little further on in the Bible, in Exodus, there's instructions to make holy art, in this case the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant has actual directions to be made. In the Ark of the Covenant, of course, is the container, the box, if you will, that the 10 Commandments were placed in. And so the Exodus chapter 25, verses 17 to 20, God tells the Jewish people, you shall make a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long. I think a cubit was the length of a forearm. And 1.5 cubits wide. Make 2 cherubim of beaten gold for the 2 ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other at the other end of one piece with the cover at each end. The cherubim shall have their wings spread out above, sheltering the cover with them. They shall face each other with their faces looking toward the cover. That was just the instructions for the cover. There's other instructions for the box as well. If anybody has seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, this is the actual ark that was created for the movie, and this is that artist's rendition of how to create the ark from those directions from Exodus, 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So nevertheless, the Old Testament banned images of God's, any images of God, and God's had an additional warning to avoid seeing his face. In Exodus chapter 33, Moses is looking to want to see the glory of God. But God says to Moses, Moses asked first, please let me see your glory. The Lord answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim my name Lord before you. I, who show favor to whom I will grant mercy to whom I will, but you cannot see my face. For no one can see my face and live. Here, continued the Lord, is a place near where you shall station yourself on the rock. Where my glory passes, I will set you in the cleft of the rock, and will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand so that you may see my back, but not my face may not be seen. Exodus chapter 33, verses 18 to 23. So, the Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel ceiling paints what he understood to be what Moses must have seen as God's glory is passing in that instance of chapter 33 of Exodus. And in this case, part of the irreverence I was mentioning earlier, Michelangelo shows God the Father's bare backside here on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And if it looks familiar, it's because it's right next to many other paintings, of course, on the wall, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And this yellow part is the part where he pictures God the Father creating the sun and the moon. So it's right next to God creating the sun and the moon on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So to be even more irreverent, if you will allow me, I said if plumbers were theologians, Exodus 33 would be explained thus. God told Moses to hide in the rock crack, and Moses would be able to see God's butt crack. So forgive me. So how did Christians come to accept depictions of images of anything in the heavens above? Here we've got all these restrictions about holy images, and the answer for Christians, any question about that's posed to Christians, the answer is always the same, isn't it? Jesus is the answer. So in St. Paul, there's our friend St. Paul's sculpture by Michelangelo at the Vatican. Jesus is described as in Colossians chapter 1, he is the image or the icon of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So here St. Paul, in St. Paul's writings in the epistles, that he's identifying Jesus is that image of God. And when was the conflict about the images first settled? Well, we've got an icon of St. John of Damascus here, and it's a really interesting icon because it's an icon within an icon. He's holding an icon of the Holy, Jesus and Mary, not the Holy Family. And St. John of Damascus, who was born around 676 AD, he had a strong defense of icons because there was this clash even at that time about whether anybody should still be making images of God. And it was his writings that were the foundation for the dogma of holy icons, first promulgated in the Second Council of Nicaea in 787. So 100 years after his birth, the Council Fathers used his writings to identify that holy images are okay. The best quote I could see from St. John of Damascus on images is this one. Now that God has appeared in the flesh and lived among men, I make an image of the God who can be seen. I do not venerate matter, but I venerate the creator of matter, who for my sake became material and deigned to dwell in matter, who through matter affected my salvation. Great way to sum up his understanding of why it's okay to have holy images. And this is a quote from a famous theologian by the name of Father Aidan Nichols. The images problem continued throughout the Middle Ages, and it was settled again in 1563 with the Council of Trent, and they decreed at the council that the veneration of saints and images of the saints are church dogma, in addition to having images of Jesus. Our Catholic faith is summed up in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and there's lots of understanding about what we believe in the Catechism that have to do with beauty and art. That's how that's connected to our faith. For example, Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 41, all creatures bear a resemblance to the beauty of God. 319, God's creatures share in his beauty, and so on. There's lots of statements of dogma about our Catholic faith related to art, related to song and music, and so forth, that all designate the beauty of God. My favorite, I think, these are more definitions from the Catechism. I think my favorite is sacred art expresses the infinite beauty of God and can turn men's minds devoutly towards God, which is the basis of my presentation here today with the images I'll be showing you soon. And what is beauty? I've got 4 different Catholic theologians from the past and present who talk about how beauty is connected to our faith and in our belief in God. Theologian Dietrich von Hildebrand described beauty as the objectively valuable as opposed to the merely subjectively satisfying. I think people can say things like, well, I love pepperoni pizza, but that's just subjectively satisfying. That's not objectively valuable. Something that's objectively valuable is something that everybody can agree is really, really beautiful. St. Thomas Aquinas split up beauty into parts of wholeness, harmony, and splendor. Catholic theologian Hans Ernst von Balthasar equated beauty with revelation. My favorite quote of his is that Jesus is God's greatest work of art. And then our current bishop, Bishop Robert Barron, who's in the Diocese of Minnesota now, he equates beauty with God, with the glory of God, and by starting with the beautiful, a catechist can draw in the appreciator with the splendor of the truth, something I'm trying to do, of course, with this PowerPoint presentation. Thus, the beautiful by way of sacred art appreciation can lead us to our faith. And it's this approach of looking at sacred art where we can take that journey, as I mentioned earlier in the day. So back to our paintings in question, and the 2 I'm focusing on again are St. Paul on the right, St. Peter on the left. And these are at that the Sarasi Chapel in the Basilica of Santa Maria del Popolo. And the subject matters of Peter and Paul depict the 2 men Bishop Robert Barron calls indispensable to our faith. St. Paul is the one who wrote the epistles, of course, and St. Peter is responsible for one of the letters as well. But their actions at the time of Christ and shortly after Christ's resurrection are so important to the way that they formed the church that we know today and how we express our faith. There's a link here. I don't know if I can do that because I'm not on the internet here. That links a YouTube video on the indispensable men that Bishop Robert Barron has shown on YouTube. So both paintings, we're going to try to compare and contrast them right now. They're both about the periods of the saints' lives that can speak to the sacred art to speak to the sacred art appreciator that you are here today doing. Both paintings are painted in the style that Caravaggio really started and was emulated by many other artists. It's called chiaroscuro, and it literally means the light and dark. He's using light and darkness to really exemplify the subject matter and to bring out the story he's trying to tell in each of the paintings. And I've got a link to the chiaroscuro definition there. Both works have a small number of human subjects, with St. Paul's also having a horse. St. Paul's painting, of course, is scriptural. It's from the Acts of the Apostles. St. Peter's crucifixion is not. It's what we call apocryphal information. It was a writing that didn't make it into the canon of the Bible, but it was well known, especially in the Middle Ages, because many painters painted this scene. Michelangelo did his own version of the crucifixion of St. Peter. In fact, Michelangelo's version, which I don't have here, has the Roman soldiers hanging around and the soldiers putting the crucifix upside down and people watching in the scene. This apocryphal literature indicates that St. Peter felt not worthy to be crucified in the same way that Jesus was, and he insisted on being crucified upside down. Another comparison of the paintings is that both paintings seem to have a prominent posterior in it, that being the backside of the horse and the backside of the individual down underneath the cross on St. Peter's painting. I liken that to the phrase "a large bloomin' arse." If anybody remembers the movie My Fair Lady, there's a famous scene in My Fair Lady where the character played by Audrey Hepburn is at the races in England with all the rich people, but she's from the poor side of town. And instead of being quiet as the horses race by, she's put a wager on a horse named Dover. And while everybody's quietly watching the horses go by at the races, she starts yelling out, "Come on, Dover, come on, Dover, come on, Dover, move your bloomin' arse, Dover." And that's where I get the connection here. If we were able to connect by internet, I could show you that scene. Both paintings depict striking angles of action. Caravaggio was famous for putting really unusual postures in the pictures and not having the traditional kind of painting the way I showed in Caravaggio, where people were presented in a I suppose a more reverent fashion. I'm not so sure how reverent some people found the prominent posteriors in this painting, or the fact that St. Paul is prostrate on the ground and he's not even in the middle of the painting. But very unusual angles that he painted, probably to tell a different kind of story. If the St. Peter painting is of his crucifixion, then the paintings contrast in a sense, because the picture on the left is about the end of St. Peter's earthly life as a Christian, and the painting on the right is the start of the Christian life of Saul of Tarsus, soon to be our St. Paul. But if the painting on the left is about St. Peter's martyrdom, because some historians, art historians, title this painting not the crucifixion of St. Peter, but the martyrdom of St. Peter. And I find that significant, because if it's his martyrdom, then the paintings have a comparison together, because this is the start of St. Peter's life as a saint. The light sources I wanted to talk about, just from an art historian point of view, are interesting, because the light source of the St. Paul painting on the right appears to come in the front. The light source is coming in the front, the way Caravaggio paints the shadows in the painting. And the painting on the left is interesting. It seems like the light source seems to be coming from the left rather than the front. And these paintings are facing each other, okay? So I've quoted the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 12, where Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." And I think Caravaggio had that in mind when he painted these paintings and the positions they were put in the chapel, and I'll tell you why soon. So both paintings require the observer to have an understanding of the lives of the saint, to know what the painting's about, though the descriptions could be sufficient enough. So sacred art, like the artwork of the stained glass windows, for example, in churches, sometimes you need a little bit of instruction to get to the point where, well, this is depicting a certain part of the gospel or a certain part of a story in the Bible and so forth. But once you see that, my hypothesis would be that the captivation of what it means to you should set you on that faith journey. So we'll start with St. Paul's conversion. I talked about it earlier, that this is set in Acts of the Apostles chapter 9, verses 1 to 9, where Saul's on his way to Damascus to search and destroy the Christian community there. But he stopped somewhere on the way, and though the Acts of the Apostles doesn't mention a horse, many paintings of artists depict him on a horse on his way to Damascus. Saul, a zealous Pharisee, was a student under Gamaliel, who's mentioned in the Bible as well, and he would be well versed in Hebrew scripture. Caravaggio paints what I count to be 12 limbs in the middle of the painting. the center of the painting is sometimes the focus of the painting. It's not quite the focus in this painting, but if it is, we've got 12 limbs, and 12 being a very important number in the Bible by way of the 12 apostles, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 administrators under King David, for example. The other thing that Caravaggio does is he pictures St. Paul in Roman garb. He's in a Roman, like almost in a Roman military outfit with a sword by his side. Saul was a citizen of Rome because he was born in Roman territory in what is now southern Turkey. So, but given the fact that we've got a prominent posterior of the horse here, I would say irreverently again, that perhaps what Caravaggio is saying is not, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Rather, I think Caravaggio is saying, Saul, Saul, why are you a horse's patootie? Right? For going after these Christian communities. What good is a horse's patootie? Well, in the same way that Jesus transformed Saul into the indispensable St. Paul, if you don't know, a horse's butt's hide is actually a very valuable leather. It's called shell cordovan. This is although it's poorly cropped in the picture, this is a boot that is made here in Massachusetts. It's been made in Massachusetts probably for the last 100 years at a company called Alden, and it's styled D6974C, shell cordovan being very expensive since it's the butt hide of a horse. This one sells for about $900 per pair. And it's been renamed, in fact. It's called the Indy boot because it's what Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Harrison Ford, wore in the movie. And it's become famous as the Indy boot since 1981, since the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So in the same way that Jesus transformed St. Paul, a horse's patootie can be transformed into something really beautiful. Now back to St. Peter. Every art historian that I read, and I've tried to research as many of them as I could, all describe this, well, most of them describe it as the crucifixion of St. Peter, but some of them call it the martyrdom of St. Peter. But I submit that the latter is more accurate, and I'll say why. And the other thing that all the art historians mention is every one of them, without exceptions, indicates that the three individuals painted with St. Peter are his executioners. A few of them say, just call them Romans. St. Peter was crucified in Rome, that's well known too, but they all describe these three as executioners and or Romans. So I say executioners, Romans, you know, they don't look like Romans. Across the chapel, Caravaggio paints St. Paul, in Roman garb. These guys just have kind of everyday clothes on. I don't see the Roman nature of their being Roman soldiers or anything. But I understand that they understand that these gentlemen are hoisting the crucifixion upside down, the way the apocryphal literature describes the crucifixion of St. Peter. But what doesn't make sense to me is that the middle individual seems to be cradling the crucifixion, the cross, as if he's just steadying it. I'm not so sure he's there to push the crucifixion up, because if he was, he'd be behind it, helping hoist it up. Okay, so nevertheless, that the way the art historians see it is they're ready to hoist him up. And because it's apocryphal writing, what makes it very believable is the Gospel of John, chapter 13, 8 to 10, to show the personality of Peter. I believe this is the chapter of John where Peter is demanding that Jesus wash his whole body instead of just his feet. And that's that kind of chip on his shoulder kind of a personality that St. Peter had. That's consistent with the apocryphal writings saying, I don't deserve to be crucified like our Lord, rather I deserve to be crucified upside down. So of the three individuals that these art historians describe as executioners, I say that the one on the top holding the weight of the cross by a cord is, you can't see his face. You can't see the face of the other individual on the bottom, but you can kind of see the face of the middle individual. And he's, as I said, appears to be cradling the cross, maybe as if to steady it or maybe even to bring it down and not to bring it up. So if he was there to raise the cross, reasonably he'd be under the cross, as I said earlier. And so I would say that arguably these individuals are helping to take the cross down from its upside down position rather than placing it up like the art historians are implying. So I would respectfully say that the art historians I've read are wrong about the individuals because they're not executioners. They can't be executioners. There's no instruments of torture there. You see the nails in St. Peter's, that would be his left hand, and the nails in his feet, but that's all you see. You don't see any hammer or other nails hanging around on the ground. You see the bottom individual holding a shovel. The art historians, I think, would have said that the shovel was there to dig the hole, to put him upside down. I would say that perhaps the shovel is there to undig the hole to take him down, back off the cross. The individual on top has his arms bent, kind of almost like the wings, I will say, like as a dove, shall we say. The individual on the ground is almost acting like a fulcrum to the cross to position it after he has undug the hole where St. Peter was crucified. In the other individual, you can see his face, and I'll describe him a little bit more in a moment. The faceless individual is depicted as very strong, as I said, with his elbows bent like the wings of a bird, of dove, I'll say. And the individual's face is partially seen, and the faceless individual on the ground we've actually seen before, I would suggest. The individual kneeling on the ground is I would say, a mirror image of the painting on the Sistine Chapel from the Michelangelo. You see a prominent posterior. You see the soles of his feet. You see a bent elbow as well. So Michelangelo's God the Father in Exodus 33, I say, is very similar to the individual on the bottom of Caravaggio's painting. Okay? Michelangelo was a big influence on Caravaggio. There's a painting he made of the Calling of St. Matthew, which is the painting I've cropped in the bottom of the bottom right, where his hand pointing to St. Matthew, who's pointing to himself, is designed in a mirror image of the painting also on the Sistine Chapel of the creation of Adam by the Michelangelo. That hand is identical, as you can see, a mirror image of each other. Why? Well, as Christians, we know that Jesus is the new Adam. We have seen the partially faced individual in the painting of St. Peter and other paintings of Caravaggio. The Calling of St. Matthew and Supper at Emmaus, he paints Jesus with a red cloth on his shoulder, on his right shoulder, on both paintings. And a third Caravaggio that we won't concentrate on is the Taking of Christ, all painted around the same time in 1600, where Christ again has a red sleeve on his right shoulder, right cloth on his right shoulder. So there's our painting of the martyrdom of St. Peter. I would say that these aren't executioners. Rather, this is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit that Caravaggio has painted, and not executioners at all. They're taking Peter down from the cross, I would suggest. A little later in Caravaggio's life, he painted the crucifixion of St. Andrew. And in that painting, you see kind of a deathly pallor to the skin of St. Andrew as opposed to the bright skin of the martyrdom of St. Peter. this is his resurrected body, in other words, that Caravaggio is painting. And it's very similar to, I'll get to that in a minute. Excuse me, I thought another painting was coming. The Supper at Emmaus is a good reason why I can suggest that the art historians are wrong. The Supper at Emmaus, if you remember that passage of Luke chapter 24, where the disciples are running from Jerusalem and they meet up with someone that they start talking to, and the person asks them where they're going. They're saying, well, haven't you heard? We're leaving Jerusalem because of all that's happened, where our Master Jesus has been crucified and died. And it's only when they go into the inn at Emmaus where they recognize it's Jesus that's been with them. So my suggestion is that the art historians haven't got to the point where they're recognizing the Jesus in the painting of the martyrdom of St. Peter. Again, in this painting, another Caravaggio from 1607, he paints the doubting Thomas putting his finger into the wounds of Jesus, and you can see the skin of Jesus and his resurrected body is very similar to the way he paints St. Peter. So, the stories in Holy Scripture are models of our lives. Sacred art is a catechetical instrument that draws in the observer and art appreciator to consider what he or she would do when Jesus comes calling. Our first response may be like Caravaggio's St. Matthew, who asks if it's me that you're talking to. And it's up to us then to complete that story consistent with what God's will is for us. Holy Scripture is a library of examples of experiences in relation to God in sacred art, and it gives us a starting point to ponder where we are in that relationship as well as what we need to make it better. Going back to the taking of Christ, Caravaggio's taking of Christ, we've got the soldiers taking Jesus when Judas is kissing him, identifying him as such. We see what our art historians recognize to be St. John running away at that point while he's about to be arrested. And we've got an individual with a lantern showing some of the light on Jesus that's supposed to be St. Peter in his denial that he knew Jesus at this time. But this is also a painting, a self-portrait of Caravaggio, who puts himself in the place of St. Peter in this painting on the right. The far right is a self-portrait of Caravaggio. So how does sacred art make the connection between God and man? St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, also known as St. Edith Stein, she was a Holocaust victim in World War II, wrote about art's connection to meanings, structures, and pure form. She never wrote specifically about this connection between God and man, but a recent professor, Christopher Haley, has synthesized her writings and made that connection in one of his articles where he writes about sacred art. And in that particular article, he says that the standing together in the Logos, these are all words from St. Edith Stein, is the highest unity of meaning. Art points to that unity. In art, there is an ontological ascent to meaning. By becoming more beautiful, the finite world also becomes more divine. Art, by manifesting meaning, manifests God in the finite world. God calls to individuals and communities through art. The work of art not only demands, but also provides a means by which we may become more holy as our Heavenly Father is holy. St. John Paul II spoke of the special vocation of the artist that relates to all of us. Just as Jesus is God's greatest masterpiece, with Jesus we are to make our own lives a masterpiece. Here's an autobiographical picture that I'd like to share with you. This is myself and my lovely wife meeting John Paul II in Rome in 2002 on our honeymoon. When you go and get special permission from the bishop to attend a Wednesday audience, you sit with all the newlyweds from around the world, and we're the last group to get a photo opportunity with the Pope at a Wednesday audience. And if you can't see it, but there's a line in the background of, you see a wedding gown, a tux, a wedding gown and a tux, a wedding gown and a tux. We sat next to a couple from Spain to our left, a couple from Germany to our right, and a couple from Australia in front of us in the St. Peter's Square. So, as Genesis has it, all men and women are trusted with the task of crafting their own life. This is the words of St. John Paul II. With the task of creating their own life. In a certain sense, they are to make of it a work of art, a masterpiece. So my wife and I are working on that as we speak. And we'll conclude with a summary, pun intended, with St. Thomas Aquinas. Beauty requires three parts, I mentioned that earlier: perfect, integrity, harmony, and splendor. From this unity becomes the objectively valuable. That thing that everybody can agree upon is beautiful. And it leads to the discovery of our faith as presented here. And from that faith, we embrace the beautiful and kiss the face of God. And with our faith, we become holy like our Father is holy. This approach and analysis of beauty in sacred art leads us to discover our faith. And from that discovery, we make our life a masterpiece. So thank you very much. Thanks. Any questions? Any comments? Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned the influence of the Michelangelo,
Right.
Caravaggio. When he did those two paintings in Santa Maria del Popolo, was he thinking of the frescoes on the same subjects by the Michelangelo in the Vatican?
Great question. So the question indicates whether we know if there's any writings that would indicate Caravaggio had that in mind. I don't think there is any writings to that effect. Caravaggio had a very interesting life. He's the best way I think I could describe it in modern terms is you're reading about all these, I read about in the paper, unfortunately, about all these rap stars getting into trouble and getting shot and killed and stuff like that. He was very much like that. He was involved in all the seedier elements of society, but he was this brilliant artist at the same time. In fact, he died very young, unfortunately, and the only writings about him, unfortunately, are court history recordings of what happened when he was brought into court on various charges and so forth, unfortunately. So it's up to speculation as to whether he had that. But many art historians clearly point out those connections, like the identical mirror images of the hand of Adam and the hand of Jesus, and the others that I mentioned as well. Great question. Thank you. Another question? Yes?
I was reading a little bit last night, and it said basically that the more trouble he got into, the more notorious, the more his art became more reverent.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, prior to he wasn't doing things like that.
Yeah, he became more reverent. Yes.
Fortune teller.
Yes, he started off doing non-sacred art. He was a teenager in an artist's studio. Did a lot of fruit bowls and things like that, still life kind of paintings. Then went into these other things that you mentioned that were certainly not secular, that was more secular and not sacred at all. But I think from what we saw today, I think that's consistent with what you understand, is that the later paintings became a little more reverent and not so, I focused on the prominent posteriors in the two paintings that I talked about, which certainly makes it a little on the irreverent side and not the reverent side. But yeah, towards the end of his life, much more reverent. Yes.
Also thought of the picture of George Washington in his horse at Mechanics Hall.
You know, I'm not familiar with that one.
You're not?
Is it, does it show the horse's posterior as well?
The main, that's,
Aha.
that's the main.
So maybe he's emulating Caravaggio's the conversion of Saint Paul. Could be, yeah.
And
But
one other thing, I never heard of Caravaggio.
yeah,
Until last
he
night when
he
I
was
reading.
he was hired at this very same time as Caravaggio to paint the paintings in that chapel, but he's clearly overshadowed by Caravaggio.
Because apparently he was very, very good.
He was, his painting is over the altar. Though Caravaggio could only get the two on the side, you would think that the painting over the altar would be the one that for the artist of the higher stature, which was Carracci at the time. Absolutely, and you could see the really differences in the way they both approach their art, where there's that very reverent style of Carracci, where Caravaggio's got this kind of odd angle, strange subject matter. Yeah, right. But it's still it's sacred art. My wife had a problem with my being irreverent about the posteriors, and I said, but it's on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, right?
There are other things.
Yes. But those are the few people that know my wife well in this room know that she's the most beautiful troublemaker in the world. Any other questions?
I think the one thing I did notice, I'm not really one to know much about art, it's the extreme detail you put into the pictures and the preciseness of the faces and just, yes, it had the dark background, but on the parts that he had to show, they were extremely detailed. It was like it was very, very lifelike.
Photographic.
Yeah,
Photograph. Yes.
Photograph.
And that's what set him apart. The Carracci painting, if we can use that as another example, seems like almost a holy glow to it, almost unreal or surreal, whereas he's just showing the really stark images, the reality. He was going into for the reality of what was going on. To hopefully pull us into it. Where would we be if we were in that situation, observing the conversion of St. Paul, the martyrdom of St. Peter, for example? That it really places us there the way a photograph can do. Yeah, great comment. Thank you. Questions, comments, and we're in good shape. We're not over time. Yes. Yes, please.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, and I hope this is going to be recording so we can see this again, because I got so much out of it.
On Shrewsbury Cable, anyway, I could hopefully get a copy of it and share it with Father later, so that he could share it with everybody here too. Yes.
Okay. Just as, maybe I'm thinking out of the box, which is me. Just as these paintings try to captivate and set the observer into faith, I'm thinking about all the artists' pictures of the Blessed Mother, paintings of the Blessed Mother. Guadalupe, she's dressed like they are, his skin tone like they are. All the things like an Aztec woman would be. If you picture a black Blessed Mother of
The Black Madonna, right?
of an Africa.
Yes.
That's
Our Lady of
speak
Cabejo.
to her more than the other one is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So if I understand where you're going with the comment, especially the Blessed Mother, she is seen as the mother of all the nations. There's paintings where she emulates all of different nations throughout the world. Yes. Is that where you're going with that?
I want to say, if I were an African woman and looked at a Blessed Mother picture from Fatima, I wouldn't be so drawn to it as if I saw a picture of her depicted as an African woman.
Yeah, Our Lady of Caravaggio, for example, in Rwanda, it shows her as a dark-skinned Blessed Virgin, yes. Whereas in Portugal, the Our Lady of Fatima, she probably looks very Portuguese, you know?
But I'm seeing that as all art is leading us to the faith. But this I can see more of it.
In the Guadalupe example, I think you gave the Guadalupe example. I think all the art historians and the sacred observers of her depict. They specifically say that she's neither native Mexican or Spanish. She's a mestiza, I think is how you say it. How do you say the mixed race, Gabriel? Mestizo. What is it? Mestizo. She's painted as a mestizo. She's painted as a mixture of the both cultures to Juan Diego. You know. Good point. Very good point.
Drawn to her. Yeah.
Yes, to make the people more drawn to her. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Oh, right in front.
I'm
Sure.
sorry, I didn't cut-
No, please.
Oh, I think the art is the question of is it idolatry, but I think it's very educational. It makes it Jesus and all the sacred characters in the Bible and just more realistic to people.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. You know, if this is just legend that we're just learning historically, what good is it? But if we can relate to it, it's part of who we are, because we're all children of God. You know,
The fact that Jesus lived, if God didn't want us to see him, he wouldn't have made him a human being that walked around with people.
That's right. That's right. Great point. Thank you. Another question.
Sumo Kid wrote a book, Traveling with Pomegranates.
Oh, I don't know that one. What's the name of the author?
Her daughter went to Europe
Okay.
to look for Black Madonnas.
Okay.
And I kind of think part of it is where these people were born, okay? Where their skin might be darker. Like, now I saw...
Because the Black Madonna is a Polish painting, is it not? No?
I had
Right?
no idea. They went to
Think so.
Crete. They went...
Uh-huh.
I haven't read the book in a while.
There's more than one. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I went to, and now I can't think of the name of it, right? It's north of Barcelona. Okay.
Would be the Catalan area? No?
No, not quite that far.
Montserrat?
Yeah, Montserrat.
Montserrat. Okay.
And you can see the statue that was found ostensibly in a cave in that area.
Right.
Yeah. So this is, I don't want to say common, but they're there.
Right.
Different places.
It's how we interpret it. And every generation and every people and every area has their own interpretation and their own understanding, right? To bring that to life, right? And these images that you're discussing they've stood the test of time. We know them today, even though they're hundreds, maybe thousands of years old, right?
Right. I can't get my mind around who created this statue in this cave that someone found.
And it was of the Madonna.
Oh, yeah. And
Yeah, I'm
now
not-
you can see it, if you
Sure.
go into the church. I think it's the church.
And it's in the Montserrat area. Interesting. I'll have to look that up. Thanks. Another question? There was another question? No? Okay. Great.
I think in the painting of St. Peter and Martyr,
Yeah. Right?
I think what I saw in that
Yes, I'm listening.
wasn't so much as him being ready to be crucified,
Right?
as almost like a gentleness of bringing him down and home.
So you would agree that this is
I kind
not
of agree with what
not
you said.
putting them upside down as
It's-
they're bringing them
it's kind
down.
of like it's almost like a gentleness.
Yes.
Of laying him down.
Right, right.
And
That's what I see, especially
That's-
in
yeah.
the individual. I say Caravaggio's painting as Jesus. He's cradling him in his arms.
It's plaque,
Right.
it's not taught, it's, and the holding of the cross.
Sure.
I kind of see like a gentleman's staff.
I do as well. I do as well. I don't see any, anger of executioners or anything like that. He's not painting that at all. He's trying to. I think he's trying to tell us a different story.
Yep.
Good. Thank you.
Who's the other guy in the St. Paul?
The St.
That's
Paul.
his-
They
who's
just
that?
they just describe him as his valet. That's kind of holding the bridle of the horse. That's all. Yeah, and I don't go into that at all. I just what I saw in the painting, unfortunately, is the St. Paul and the patootie. That's what I see. And then I see the other, wow, the bloomin' arse in the other one. Yes, of course.
I think that one of the reasons Caravaggio was in Gratu's favor with the public was the way he presented the saints. He made them look like ordinary people.
Right.
He didn't glorify them.
Yeah, it's only till the a modern era, if I'm not mistaken, where he's had this resurgence of popularity where they see his incredible influence on other artists, yes. I mean, he had such a sorry life.
He did it, and he had some very wealthy patrons,
Right.
too. But I am sure, like,
They recognized his,
his money away, and then he killed
yeah,
somebody.
and he killed somebody, yeah. He would get drunk, walk around with a soldier who had a sword, and anybody who got in his way, he would, have some sort of fight with. And he killed somebody that way. Yes?
There was something, I think it was 60 Minutes a few years ago, there was some actors in Italy who reenacted all of Caravaggio's
Really?
paintings
Wow.
in 3 dimensions.
Huh. I wonder if that's somewhere you can find on the internet. I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
These paintings obviously are an important part of what I'll be analyzing in the paper that I'll be writing, so I would certainly need something like that too.
For example, these 2 paintings,
Yes.
they were actors who were taking the postures
Right,
of
wow.
the figures
I'll have to check
in
that
the
out.
paintings.
Thank you for,
Yeah, recently, like
right.
3 or 4 years ago.
It's got to be somewhere on the internet that I can
believe
find.
it was 60 Minutes.
Right.
Might start there.
I will. Thank you. Does Gisela have a question?
Probably she wanted to explain also that
Yes.
artists tend to project certain images according to the message that they want to send.
Right.
According to a compilation of events that happen in one particular time in one particular area.
Okay.
In other words, I can look at the paint on their left, me being an artist myself,
Right.
I can project it and say that the man of the darkness is nothing but a demon trying to come and get the soul of the person
Ah.
that venerates
Uh-huh.
the Christ or God.
Right.
I can say probably that the man that is holding him down, even with the Roman cape, with the Roman red sash,
Right.
he might be one of the saviors.
Mhm.
And the man that is with the knees on the ground symbolizes the faith.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the points of modern darkness. So according to how we look or according to what the artist wants to project,
Sure.
paints, that's the only reason why paints are painted with different colors. So we can give different kind of explanation and different kind of meaning.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, it speaks to us in so many different ways, doesn't it? Yes.
I mean, those people could be ashamed.
Ashamed?
Ashamed.
In what way?
It's like you can't see their face.
Right. Right.
That they did a bad thing.
Right. And I think that's how art historians come to a different conclusion than I do. I look at, I said in the earlier panels how we can't see God's face. Well, you don't see his face, and he's got that prominent posterior, just like the Michelangelo painting on the Sistine Chapel. So that's what I see too. I'm trying to have some evidence to back up what I claim it to be. But you're right. People not showing their face is a form of shame. Absolutely, absolutely.
I think it's marvelous that you can point out so many things, so many different ways of looking at that, and make up different stories to go along with
Right.
it, possibilities of exactly what this is.
In this program that I'm completing, and hopefully completing well, is we start off with the sources. I try to come up with, and first started off with the Jewish scripture, the Old Testament, gave you examples of New Testament scripture. You start off with those sources and see where it leads you. And if you're looking at it with those lenses on, you're seeing, hopefully, bringing up your faith, in taking that faith journey that I mentioned. Anything else? Lots of pizza left. Italians are food pushers, okay? Well, thanks again, okay? Take care.